Feu Général d'Armée Sadio Camara.
Take a listen at the Malian Deputy Director of the Directorate of Information and Public Relations of the Armed Forces Djibril Maiga give an update on the current situation in the country. Amidst claims by terror groups like Jinim that various roads leading to Bamako are now under their blockade, and that no oil tankers or transit good vehicles will enter or leave the city, as a ripple effect of the April 25, 2026 attacks that claimed the life of Defense Minister Sadio Camara and several civilians. It is an update in which the DIRPA Deputy Director acknowledged existence of blockades on some roads around the city and other urban centers and regions like Kidal, revealing that the threat is still present and terror groups are trying to reorganize, but stated that the army is very vigilant on the ground and in the air, with 24-hour surveillance and airstrikes being carried out by drones and combat planes to disrupt their maneuvers.
Mon intervention va s'articuler autour de 3 points.
My presentation will focus on 3 points. The first point is of course related to the cowardly and barbaric attack perpetrated on the 25th, Saturday, April 25, 2026, and of course with the waters which are currently being unfolded throughout the national territory. The second point, we had observed through the press and on social networks and even in the city that following the attack, there are some cases of conflation. So it's about taking stock of this and explaining a little to the people that they can be the ins and outs of this. And the last point is really an address to the population. So, on the cowardly and barbaric attack perpetrated on Saturday, April 25, 2026 in Bamako and in several regions of our country, we can say that these attacks are part of a vain and desperate attempt to destabilize the state by terrorists and their sponsors. These sponsors are both internal and external sponsors. So this sinister, meticulously orchestrated project aimed to assassinate our authorities. That is why the terrorists had several suicide vehicles at the time. A first suicide vehicle intended for the home of the Minister of State, Minister of Defense and Veterans, the late Army General Sadio Camara, and a second suicide vehicle was this time intended for the residence of the Head of State, Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces, Army General Assimi Goïta. But thanks to the promptness and responsiveness of our elements, they found them on site and faced them a vigorous response which of course made it possible to contain the threat and defuse the vehicle. Ladies and gentlemen of the press, the scale of the attack and the methods of action used by the enemy sufficiently prove that the terrorists received reinforcements from outside as well as from inside this locality of our country for it to be attacked in a simultaneous and coordinated manner. We certainly remember that in 2012 we witnessed the same scenario. Simultaneous and coordinated attack followed by a media campaign, and I think we have been subjected to media cabals recently, for some time now. If my memory serves me right, it was in October following the fuel crisis. People were saying that Bamako was surrounded. There were all sorts of speculations and conjectures about the security situation that prevailed in the capital at the time. And it is practically this media cabal that aimed for the same thing, because it must be recognized that in 2012, the mainstream media had of course done this, often pushing men to leave certain positions without fighting. And this time our men did not bite at the house of these presses and these mainstream media. Our men fought justly until the last energy, making the ultimate sacrifice so that Mali would remain and that Mali would endure in the face of these attacks. Ladies and gentlemen of the press, the General Staff salutes the responsiveness and promptness of the defense and security forces, which of course made it possible to contain the threat and inflict heavy losses. This can be seen, of course, in the neutralization of several hundred terrorists, the recovered or destroyed motorcycles and vehicles. The terrorists had no other choice but to retreat. So the current security situation shows that the threat is still present, with attempts, of course, to reorganize terrorist groups.
Avec des tentatives, bien entendu, de réorganisation des groupes terroristes. Ils sont en train de tenter de se réorganiser.
They are trying to reorganize, except under the vigilance of our determined military on the ground and also the aerial surveillance carried out by our drones and planes, as well as the strikes, which are disrupting their maneuvers.
Par nos drones et les avions, ainsi que les frappes, sont en train de les désorganiser dans leurs manœuvres.
We can also note, of course, offensive reconnaissance carried out by ground troops, all of which demonstrates control of the situation. In relation to these attacks of April 25, 2026, the particularity or singularity lies at two levels. First, there is the existence of internal and external complicity, and the second is practically the cases of infiltration, that is in every respect. Regarding these 2 points, we will elaborate on them later. As far as the Kidal region is concerned, I was going to say, we are in the process of reorganizing our deployment with a repositioning of certain units in accordance with the principles of the forces. This is clearly a war strategy, and as you know, with more than 10,000 combatants mobilized both from within and outside, we must use all available strategies to save the lives of our men and subsequently be able to reconquer. So, particularly in the localities of Anafis and Aglohik, our elements are positioned in these localities with a view to a reorganization and articulation, a serene occupation of the national territory. The restoration of the system at Bezanga is effective. At this precise moment, our elements are in Absinga and they have once again shown their professionalism by defeating this sinister project of the terrorists and their internal and external sponsors. The military hierarchy salutes the bravery, determination of the farmer and encourages them to redouble their efforts for the safeguarding of the homeland. You have chosen to advance where others retreat, and as they say, when the advance is hard, only the hard ones endure, and only the hard ones advance. So, ladies and gentlemen, the enemy, disoriented as it is, has no other choices and other options than disrupting the road networks around Bamako with complex methods of action involving infiltration.
Avec des modes d'action complexes assortis d'infiltration. Grâce à l'engagement et à la détermination de nos hommes,
thanks to the commitment and determination of our men, the Sabo-Bamako axis is passable. However, the Kay and Kita roads now constitute the focus of our efforts.
La route de Kay et celle de Kita constituent aujourd'hui l'axe d'effort des terroristes. L'axe d'effort, ça veut dire qu'ils se sont regroupés.
This focus means that they have regrouped there and have put all their remaining energy into this operation. I can also assure you that operations are currently underway as I speak to you to make these roads passable. They are determined to ensure the country's fuel supply, even if it costs them their blood.
même s'il faut au prix de leur sang. Et c'est ce qu'ils prouvent.
This is what they are proving. This is what they have been doing every day since October 2025.
Alors, par rapport au deuxième point,
regarding the second point about the conflation, as you have known since the 25th, there is a national feeling of empathy and the people as a whole were appalled by the attacks.
Le peuple dans son entièreté a été consterné par les attaques, ce qui fait que certaines populations,
which means that some groups often attack peaceful citizens, innocent people, and we say this to avoid the conflation.
Nous disons ceci pour éviter l'amalgame. Il n'est pas donné à tout le monde de savoir.
It is not given to everyone to know who is a terrorist and who is not. And as soon as you intercept a person, that is to say a presumed, and I say presumed terrorist, it is simply a matter of either contacting the competent structures who can now give this, that is to say this presumed terrorist, to the appropriate authorities to carry out thorough investigations. And I will speak on this point because, in reality, I think that a terrorist captured alive represents a wealth of information for the specialized services. Therefore, we ask the population not to subject him to mob justice, but to hand him over to the competent authorities for thorough investigation. The General Staff of the Armed Forces thanks them for their commitment alongside the farmer. We saw this on the 25th, from Kidal to Bamako and Severe, everywhere the country was attacked, the population came out in massive numbers and defended the army. The people understood that the issue of security is not just the prerogative of those in uniform. It is truly a dirty business that concerns everyone, and this security culture is well understood. The General Staff thanks the Malian people for their efforts and urges them not to give in to division. Not to give in to division, to continue to support the farmer as they have always done through the provision of reliable information. And regarding the information to be provided, I think we had the CIOs in this sense with contacts, that we would possibly have to call for backup contacts, I was going to say. And there are several videos that are both made by DIRPA here, Sigma and the Gold Term. There are toll-free numbers in the press kit. We have also put the toll-free numbers for you to continue to relay them to the population, and it is extremely important. So when you see suspicious people, there is a certain number of details that you have to give. The place, the time, the number of motorcycles and vehicles, except that you have to be extremely careful. I think that in recent days for some time, there was a voice message circulating through social networks in which the voice message said that towards the Neguela sector, there were more than 6,000 motorcycles coming. You see, it will be necessary to understand, to draw out the truth from the booklet. Why am I saying this? Because oftentimes, these voice messages are made by terrorists to mislead us and also to create fear in your hearts. So never give in to fear, never give in to fear. That is really the goal sought from these voice messages, let's say, not only to mislead the strong defenses but also to mislead the population. Ladies and gentlemen of the press, and I am going to give some advice to the population, this population which is also very resilient. The first element is to avoid collaborating with terrorists in any form. Because collaboration with terrorists often can take many forms, not in an innocuous way, but perhaps passive complicity. Let me give you an example. You have someone who used to buy bread from you, and every day, he bought 2 or 3 loaves of bread, and from one day to the next, this same person comes to ask you for 100 loaves of bread, even though, as far as you know, he is not selling bread. So you should ask yourself what prompted him to do this, or who he buys these loaves of bread for. And this is really the beginning of a number of questions to be able to shed light on this. That's the first element. The second element is complicity with them. It's fortunate that it's often within the big cities that they buy the motorcycles, and they buy these motorcycles from people who often don't know who is selling the motorcycles. And among some of the motorcycles seized, the odometers were not large. That is to say, the number of the odometers was not large. There were not large numbers. In fact, to tell you that these motorcycles did not travel long distances. Because when we see the scale of the attack, we would have thought that perhaps some motorcycles left from far away. Whereas when you see the counters, that means, as we have so aptly put it, cases of internal complicity, we really need to stop. Now, the second element is to remain cautious and vigilant in the face of disinformation. And I think that at this level today some become passive accomplices of terrorists without knowing, however, by relaying the information posted by these terrorists and this information which is likely to terrify people. And I'll tell you, the most impactful form of terrorism is psychological terrorism. And even when you're sleeping in your bed, you don't have, what do you call it, you're not at ease in your head. And this psychological terrorism is carried out via networks, via social networks. So, to relay information, and I think that before relaying information, there is a whole technique of verification called fact-checking, and I think that among you here there are specialists, and like the other journalists, specialists in the field of fact-checking. And we say it even for populations. It's not easy to just see and share because it's much easier to share information through a simple click, but the repercussions of that information, you can't measure the magnitude of that. And that is precisely why you are being asked to avoid doing that. And also avoid sharing obscene images of our soldiers. Our soldiers are the bulwarks of our freedom, the bulwarks of our sovereignty. So when these soldiers have families, I think it's not in good taste, it's not appropriate to show images that don't sell, images that are not clean in relation to our soldiers. It's truly sad and pathetic. You should accompany our soldiers in this fight. So we will tell the media to avoid relaying certain information without verification. Because we know that in the media it is quite the principle of cross-checking, the principle of verifying information before broadcasting and avoiding amplifying certain actions without real evidence, because when we amplify, it's not good. Always verify information before publication. Because I believe that journalists, I mentioned earlier the notion of hybrid warfare to which we are subjected, and this hybrid warfare uses much more influence and psychological strategies, and the media can play a big role in this area. So we consider journalists, just like you, to be soldiers of information. And also our appeal to information soldiers is to think before writing your texts, always think about the context. The context is very important. And what is the context in our current situation? The context is that we are a country at war, and in a country at war, we should defend the higher interests of the nation. The context is that we are in a country at war. I remind you that the context is that we are in a country at war. So the context must influence the texts to avoid pretexts. I will conclude by saying this: our soldiers are our heroes, the bulwarks of our freedom. The farmer draw their strength, their commitment and their asceticism from the resilience of the Malian people. A resilient people. And I would also like to add that our sincerest and most cordial thanks and greetings go to the journalists who work tirelessly to ensure that good information, true information, can be made available to the public. And I think they understood that, and they are doing their tasks as they should.
Et je pense qu'ils ont compris cela et ils font leur tâche comme ça se doit. Je vous remercie.
Thank you.